James Walton looked Wilhelmina Dawson up and down for 4 seconds, then handed her back her own letter of introduction. "You're not what I asked for." She stood at the Copper Creek depot with her trunk, her $12, and the desert sun burning through her coat. 3 weeks on a train from Boston. 3 weeks telling herself this was brave, not desperate. And now, a man she'd never met was returning her like something ordered by mistake. Behind her, the train pulled out without her. Then a stranger picked up her trunk and said quietly, "I've got a better offer." She had no idea that the worst moment of her life had just become the first day of the only one she ever wanted. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, stay with us. Subscribe to our channel. Follow this story to the very end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The station master had already stopped watching. That was the part that humiliated Wilhelmina most. Not Walton's words, not even his expression, which had been less cruel than simply indifferent. It was the fact that the moment Walton turned and walked away, the station master went back to sorting freight manifests as though nothing of consequence had happened. As though a woman hadn't just been unwrapped and rejected on a public platform like a parcel addressed to the wrong house. Wilhelmina. Willa. Her mother had always called her, and she had carried that name across 2,000 miles, like a second piece of luggage, pressed her lips together, and did not cry. She had made herself a promise on the train somewhere outside of Kansas City. She had pressed her forehead against the window glass and watched the land turn from green to brown, and told herself, whatever happens, you will not cry in public. You have cried enough in private. The public version of you is made of something harder. She picked up her traveling bag. She set it down again because her hands were shaking. James Walton had not even waited to see if she had somewhere to go. She had read his letters 6 times over the course of the journey. She had practically memorized the third one, the one where he described his house outside Copper Creek, a proper house he'd written with a parlor and 2 bedrooms and a view of the red hills that his mother had always loved. He'd sounded almost gentle in that letter, almost like a man capable of kindness. She had folded that letter so many times the creases had gone soft. She reached into her bag and found it. She looked at it for a moment, then she dropped it into the dust beside the platform. "That bad, huh?" The voice came from her left. She turned. He was leaning against the far corner of the depot wall. A tall man, broad through the shoulders, with a hat pulled low enough that she couldn't read his face clearly in the glare. He was holding a coil of rope in one hand and a shipping receipt in the other, and he had the look of a man who had been standing there for a while attending to his own business and had simply happened to notice hers. "I beg your pardon," Willa said. "Didn't mean to intrude." He pushed off the wall, straightened, and touched the brim of his hat. "Lucas Reed. I've got a feed delivery coming in on the afternoon wagon. I've been here about 40 minutes. He paused. "I saw what happened." Willa's chin came up. "Then you saw very little. A brief conversation. Nothing of consequence." Lucas Reed said nothing. He looked at the letter in the dust. He looked back at her. "Where are you planning to go?" he asked. Not unkindly, just directly. It was the directness that almost broke her composure because she had no answer for it. She had spent 3 weeks planning for the arrival. She had not planned for this. "I'll find lodgings in town," she said. "There's one boarding house in Copper Creek. Mrs. Alderman runs it. She charges $4 a week, and she doesn't take single women without references from a local resident." He let that sit for a moment. "Do you know anyone in Copper Creek?" Willa looked at him. "I knew James Walton." "Walton won't write you a reference." Lucas said it without inflection. Not cruel, just factual in the way that only honest men can be. "He's been telling people at the Cattlemen's Association for 2 months that his bride was coming. Now that she's here and he's walked away, he's not going to want to be reminded of it." He folded the shipping receipt and tucked it in his shirt pocket. "I'm sorry. That's the truth of the situation." Willa turned away from him. She looked down the main street of Copper Creek, the hardware store, the saloon, the assay office, a church at the far end with a crooked steeple. She looked at the $12 folded inside her left glove. 3 weeks of lodging at $4 a week. That was all she had. "There must be work," she said. Some. I can cook. I can keep accounts. I taught primary school in Boston for 2 years before... She stopped. Before her father died, and the money ran out, and her aunt suggested the agency, and she had told herself it was an opportunity. I'm capable of a great deal, she finished. I believe you, Lucas said. Something in his tone made her turn back to look at him. He'd moved a few feet closer, not crowding her, just repositioning himself so the sun was no longer directly between them. She could see his face clearly now. He was younger than she'd expected from the voice, maybe 30, with a jaw that needed shaving, and eyes that were doing the kind of quiet assessment she associated with men who made careful decisions. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Reed? She asked. I need someone at my ranch, he said. Cook and housekeeper. I've got 2 ranch hands and a chuck situation that's been charitable to describe as rough for the past 8 months. I can offer you room and board, a private room, and $3 a week. He held her gaze. No conditions beyond the work. If you decide in a month it's not suitable, I'll drive you to the stage depot myself. Willa studied him. Why would you offer that to a woman you don't know? Because you're in a difficult position through no fault of your own, he said. And because I actually do need the help, and because sending a woman with $12 and no references into Copper Creek alone strikes me as something I'd rather not do. He shrugged one shoulder. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to consider the offer. And if I say no, then I tip my hat and we go our separate ways. He said it simply like it was true, like he meant it. Willa looked at her trunk. She looked at the letter in the dust. She bent down and picked the letter up, not to keep it, but because leaving trash on a public platform was not something her mother had raised her to do, and she folded it once and tucked it into her coat pocket. $3 a week, she said. $3 a week. Private room with a door that locks. He didn't blink. I'll put a bolt on it today, and I manage the household my own way. I don't take instruction on cooking from men who apparently haven't eaten a proper meal in 8 months. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Fair enough. All right, Willa said. I'll come. Lucas Reed was a man of surprisingly few unnecessary words, which Willa appreciated, because she was still sorting through too many of her own to want to manage his conversation as well. He collected the feed delivery from the wagon driver, without ceremony, loaded 2 sacks into the bed of his own buckboard, and then lifted her trunk as though it weighed considerably less than it did, and secured it with the same quiet efficiency. How far? She asked as she climbed to the seat. 5 miles. She nodded and said nothing more, and he didn't either. And for the first several minutes of the drive, the only sounds were the horse, the wheels, and the dry Arizona wind moving through whatever passed for brush in this part of the territory. It was Willa who broke the silence. Not because she felt social, but because there was a practical matter she needed to address. You told the station master I was your wife. Lucas kept his eyes on the road. I did. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because Copper Creek is a small town and gossip travels faster than weather. A woman arriving as a mail-order bride who got turned away, and then left with another man, that story writes itself, and not in your favor. He glanced at her sideways. As my housekeeper, you'd have questions to answer every time you went to town. As my wife, people will mind their business. And you didn't think to ask me first. I thought of it, he said. I made a judgment call. You can be angry about it. Willa considered. I'm not angry, she said, which was mostly true. I'm noting that you made a decision affecting my reputation without consulting me. You're right, he said. I should have asked. I'm sorry. She had not expected the apology. It arrived so cleanly without defense or qualification that for a moment she didn't know what to do with it. James Walton's letters had never once contained an apology for anything. How do we handle it, she said, if someone asks direct questions about our arrangement? I thought we'd figure that out as we go. That's not a plan, Mr. Reed. No, he agreed. It's not. Got a better one. She thought about it. We say we married quietly in Santa Fe. That I came out on the train to meet you, and we went before a justice of the peace there before continuing on. It's vague enough to discourage follow-up questions. Lucas was quiet for a moment. You came up with that fast. I taught school, she said. You learn to think quickly when 30 children are looking at you for answers. This time, the corner of his mouth moved more definitively. Santa Fe it is. The Double R Ranch did not look like the property of a man who had been living without proper domestic management for 8 months. The structure itself was solid, well built. She could see that much, but the neglect was everywhere in the details. The kitchen garden had gone to seed and weed in roughly equal measure. The front step had a board that flexed dangerously underfoot. Inside the main room was clean, in the way that a man cleans when he knows company is coming. Surfaces wiped, objects moved rather than organized. The accumulated evidence of bachelor disorder pushed to the edges rather than addressed. She stood in the center of the main room and turned a slow half-circle. I'll need a full pantry inventory, she said. Lucas stood in the doorway. Sure. And whatever you're currently paying for provisions in town, I'll need half of it allocated to what I'll need from the dry goods store by Friday. I can do that. The kitchen garden is salvageable if I start this week. Some of that is bolted, but the soil looks... She caught herself. She wasn't here to redesign his ranch. She was here to cook and keep house. I'll focus on the kitchen first. Take whatever time you need, he said. I'll show you the room. It was a back bedroom off the kitchen hallway. Small but not mean. A window that faced east. A bed frame with a rope mattress and a quilt that had seen better decades. He had clearly done some fast straightening. There was a water pitcher on the washstand that was still damp from being rinsed, and the floor showed fresh sweep marks. I'll put the bolt on before supper, he said. Thank you. She set her traveling bag on the chair. Where are your ranch hands? Out on the south pasture until sundown. Eli and Carson. Good men. He paused. Eli's going to have questions. He doesn't always ask them out loud, but he has them. I'll manage Eli, she said. Lucas looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. I expect you will. Eli Marsh was not a man who trusted quickly, and he made no effort to hide it. He was 50 or so, with a face like tanned leather left in the sun, and when Lucas introduced Willa at the supper table that evening, as his wife Eli looked at her with the careful measuring expression of a man who knew the timeline didn't add up, and was deciding whether to say so. He didn't say so. He picked up his fork instead and ate the biscuit she'd made from a flour sack she'd found at the back of the pantry, and after the third one, he set his fork down and said without looking up, Best biscuits I've had in 2 years. Thank you, Willa said. Lucas make these? No. Eli picked up his fork again. Didn't think so. Carson was younger, 22 maybe, with the eager, slightly overwhelmed look of a young man trying to figure out where to put his eyes in the presence of a woman at the table. He ate quickly and thanked her twice and nearly knocked over his water cup when she refilled it. After supper, when the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, and Lucas was at the desk in the main room, working through what appeared to be several weeks of unfiled paperwork. Willa washed the dishes and considered her situation. She was in Arizona. She was living under a false name in a ranch belonging to a man she'd met that morning. She had $3 a week, a room with a forthcoming bolt, and a kitchen that was going to require serious attention. She had also, she realized, eaten a hot meal and sat at a table and not been alone. It was more than she'd expected, which wasn't saying much. She dried the last dish and put it away, and went to ask Lucas where he kept the ledger books, because if she was going to manage this household, she was going to do it properly. The bolt went on that night as promised. She heard him in the hallway, the brief sounds of installation, the testing of the mechanism. 2 knocks to let her know it was done. No conversation. No waiting. She lay in the narrow bed and listened to the ranch settle into night, the distant sound of cattle, the wind, the occasional creak of the structure, and she thought about James Walton standing on that platform with her letter in his hand. You're not what I asked for. She turned onto her side and looked at the wall. She had not been enough for the life she'd planned. That was the simple truth of it. Her father's death had ended her savings. Her position at the school had ended when the new headmaster decided married women were more reliable than unmarried ones, which was a particular kind of irony. The agency had seemed like a practical solution. Walton's letters had seemed like evidence of a decent man. She had been wrong about all of it. But she was still here. She was still breathing. She had made biscuits from a depleted pantry, and she had already identified 3 things in the kitchen garden that could be revived, and she had 4 walls and a bolted door, and however improbably a situation that was not the disaster she'd been standing in at noon. It's not nothing, she told herself. Start from what isn't nothing. She slept better than she had in 3 weeks. By the end of the first full day, she had reorganized the kitchen entirely. It was not that Lucas had kept it badly. It was simply that no one had arranged it with any particular logic. Flour near the back salt on the wrong shelf. The cast iron stacked in a configuration that required moving 4 things to reach the piece you actually needed. Willa worked methodically, pulling everything out, assessing wiping down the shelving before replacing it in an order that made sense for actual cooking. She found behind a crate of canned tomatoes a small tin with a bent lid. Inside it a bundle of dried rosemary, a packet of caraway seeds, and 2 vanilla beans still wrapped in paper. Someone had kept those deliberately, carefully. She looked at them for a moment, then placed them on the shelf where she could actually find them. At noon, Eli came to the kitchen for water and stopped in the doorway. You moved things, he said. I reorganized them, she said. Is there something you need to find? He looked at the shelves. He looked back at her. The dried rosemary. She pointed without looking up from the onion she was slicing. Top shelf right of the window. He got it. He stood there another moment. Lucas's mother kept it there, he said, before she passed. Willa set down her knife. She looked at him then properly. How long ago? 4 years. Eli turned the rosemary bundle in his hands once. I didn't move it, just in case. I'll remember where it goes, Willa said quietly. Eli looked at her with an expression that was not quite softened, but was something adjacent to it. He nodded once and walked back out. She picked up her knife again and kept working, and she did not let herself think too hard about the fact that she had apparently accidentally put things back where a dead woman had kept them. Chai. She found the ledgers that evening. Lucas, to his credit, had not hidden them or suggested she stay out of the accounts. He'd simply handed them over when she asked and gone back to repairing a saddle strap on the porch. She took the ledgers to the kitchen table and went through them by lamplight. The ranch was not in trouble. That was the first thing she established. Lucas Reed was a careful man with money. His cattle numbers were solid. His grazing agreements were documented. His provisions costs were reasonable. But the household accounts were a tangle of receipts shoved between pages, and figures entered in the wrong columns, and she found 3 months of duplicate payments to the farrier because no one had checked. She carried the ledger out to the porch. Lucas looked up. You've been paying Hendricks at the blacksmith double for 3 months, she said. He stared at her. I have. You have. She showed him the entries. $14 total. He took the ledger, looked at it, looked at her. How did you find that in 2 hours? I organized it first, she said. It's easier to find problems when things are in order. He handed the ledger back. He was quiet for a moment. I'll talk to Hendricks Friday. I'll write you a note with the specifics so you don't have to remember them. He looked at her with that same careful, unhurried attention he'd aimed at her at the train station. You said you taught school. For 2 years. What else did you do? She considered. My father was an accountant. I helped him with his books from the time I was 14. When he was ill, I ran his office for almost a year before... She stopped. I'm capable of more than biscuits, Mr. Reed. I can see that. He paused. Lucas. She looked at him. I beg your pardon. If we're supposed to be married, he said, you probably shouldn't be calling me Mr. Reed. Willa considered this. Lucas, she said. It felt strange in her mouth, solid and unfamiliar. "Better," he said, and went back to the saddle strap. She stood on the porch a moment longer than she needed to, and then went inside. On the fourth morning, she walked out to the kitchen garden before breakfast. It was worse than it had looked from the outside, more gone to seed than she'd initially estimated. The weeds assertively established the soil compacted in places from lack of tending. But there was structure under it. Someone had built raised beds with good timber. Someone had planned this space with care. She got on her knees and started pulling. She was 20 minutes in when she became aware of someone standing at the edge of the garden. She looked up. Lucas with 2 cups of coffee. He held one out. She took it, sat back on her heels, and drank. The coffee was better than she'd expected. He made it strong, which she appreciated. "Who built the beds?" she asked. "My mother," he said. "Took her 3 summers to get it the way she wanted it." "What did she grow?" "Tomatoes, peppers, beans." She had a patch of sweet basil in the far corner that she was unreasonably proud of. He looked at the corner in question. "It went the first season after she died. I didn't know to cut it back." "There might be volunteers," Willa said. "If the seeds dropped before it died, I'll look." He was quiet. He drank his coffee. "You don't have to do this," he said. "The garden wasn't in what I offered you." "I know," she said. "I'm doing it anyway." She looked up at him. "Is that a problem?" He shook his head. Something moved across his face, something brief and unguarded that she didn't have words for yet. "No," he said. "That's not a problem." He left her to it. She went back to pulling weeds, and she did not examine why it mattered to her to bring a dead woman's garden back to life. She simply kept working, and somewhere in the far corner of the bed, under a mass of encroaching grass, she found 3 basil seedlings, small, pale, but alive. She sat there for a moment, with her hands in the dirt looking at them. Then she started clearing the space around them so they could grow. Walton came to the ranch on the 6th day. She heard the horse, first heard it, then heard Lucas's voice in the yard, and then heard a second voice she recognized immediately. She set down the bread dough she was working and stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she dried her hands on her apron and walked out the front door. Walton was on horseback. He hadn't dismounted, which told her something. Lucas was standing on the ground, which told her something else. "Wilhelmina," Walton said when he saw her. "Mr. Walton," she said. She kept her voice level. "I came to—" He stopped. He looked at the house, at the garden, visible on the side, at her apron, at Lucas. "I wanted to see that you were settled." "I am," she said. "Thank you for your concern. This situation—" He gestured vaguely at the ranch. "People in town are talking." "People in town are always talking," she said. "That's what towns do. You arrived as my intended." "I arrived as a woman traveling alone," she said, and she kept her voice completely calm. "Who was returned at the station like unsatisfactory freight. What happened after that is my own business." Walton's jaw tightened. "I had my reasons." "I'm sure you did." She looked at him steadily. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Mr. Walton. Good day." She went back inside. She went back to the bread dough and pressed her fists into it and breathed. A moment later, she heard hoofbeats leaving. Then she heard Lucas's boots on the porch. Then the door. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. Then no. Then, "I will be." He didn't say anything else. He got himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and opened the newspaper he'd brought from town, and he stayed there in the room while she worked through the bread. And she did not know how to articulate what that meant to her. His simply being there, not talking, not asking, just present. So she didn't try. She shaped the loaves and put them to rise, and by the time the bread was in the oven, she had her hands steady again. "He won't come back," Lucas said from behind the newspaper. "How do you know?" "Because he got what he came for," Lucas said. "He came to see if you were struggling. You weren't." He turned a page. "He won't come back." Willa looked at the oven. Is that how men like that work? Usually. She thought about that. Thank you, she said, for not interfering. He set the newspaper down and looked at her. You didn't need me to. It was the simplest thing he had said to her in 6 days, and it landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. That night, alone in her room, with the bolt drawn, Willa wrote a letter to her cousin Margaret in Providence. She had been composing it in her head for 6 days, trying to find the words that were honest without being alarming. She wrote 3 drafts and burned 2 of them in the lamp flame. The third one she kept. It said, I am not where I expected to be. But I am not where I feared I might end up either. The man is decent, more than decent. I think, though, I am cautious about thinking too quickly. The work is real, and I am good at it, and being good at something, even something hard, is better than what I had before. I am afraid some days, but I am also, this is the word I keep coming back to, interested in what this becomes, in who I might be here. I think that is enough for now. I think that might even be something. She folded the letter and addressed it. She set it beside her bag to post Friday. She turned the lamp down, but not off, not yet. Outside, she could hear the Arizona night, which was loud in a way Boston had never been, full of insects and distance, and the particular silence of space that somehow sounded louder than noise. She was getting used to it. She wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing or simply an inevitable one, but she was getting used to it. She was still here, and for the first time since the train pulled out of Copper Creek Station without her Wilhelmina Willa Dawson, thought that perhaps, just perhaps, being left behind had not been the end of something. Perhaps it had been improbably the very beginning. The letter to Margaret went out on Friday, and by Saturday morning, Willa had already stopped waiting for the world to collapse. That was the honest way to put it. For the first 2 weeks, she had been living with one hand on the door, not literally, but in the way a person holds themselves when they expect to have to move quickly. Ready for Lucas to change his mind. Ready for some condition she hadn't anticipated to surface. Ready for the arrangement to reveal its actual shape, which she'd assumed would be uglier than advertised. It didn't. The bolt stayed on her door. The $3 appeared on the kitchen table every Friday without ceremony or commentary. The men ate what she cooked and said thank you, which was more than she'd gotten at 2 of the 3 teaching positions she'd held in Boston. She started to unpack her trunk properly. That was how she knew she was settling, not the work, not the routine, but the moment she took her mother's quilt out of the cedar lining at the bottom and put it on the bed. You don't put your mother's quilt on a bed you're planning to leave. Carson was the first one to actually talk to her. Not about anything significant. It started with a question about whether she knew how to treat a blister, which she did, and then somehow became a 20-minute conversation about Carson's mother in Tennessee, who made the same kind of cornbread Willa had served on Thursday, and whether Willa thought the altitude here made it rise differently. My mother says altitude makes everything harder, Carson said, holding out his bandaged hand and looking at it with satisfaction. Bread breathing, keeping your temper. Your mother sounds wise, Willa said. She is. He was quiet a moment. She'd like you, I think. Willa looked at him. He went slightly red and picked up his hat from the table and left quickly, and she had to turn to the window to hide her expression, because it had been so long since anyone had said something like that to her. Something uncalculated and earnest that she hadn't known what to do with it. Eli took longer. Eli was a study in strategic silence. He communicated primarily through the angle of his hat brim and the length of his pauses, and Willa had learned in the first week to read both. A hat tipped back meant he was thinking. A pause of more than 4 seconds meant he had an opinion he was deciding whether to share. On the 10th day, he came into the kitchen with a hat tipped all the way back and a pause that went to 6 seconds before he said anything. We've got a calf down in the South Pen, he said. Been down since yesterday. Lucas is in town at the land office and Carson's on the fence line. I'd handle it, but my hands are... He held them up, both wrapped in bandaging from a barbed wire incident 2 days prior. I can talk you through it. What does it need? Willa said. She was already untying her apron. Fluids mostly. She's not nursing right and she's getting weak. You'd have to... He watched her move to the back door. "You're not going to ask what's involved." "You said you'd talk me through it," she said. "Start talking." Jed. The calf was a small red thing, maybe a week old, with eyes that had gone dull and a hip that kept giving out when she tried to stand. Willa knelt in the dirt without hesitation, which she could tell surprised Eli despite his best efforts not to show it. "Boston women," he said half to himself. "What about them?" she said. "Nothing. Thought you'd be more never mind." He crouched beside her, hands useless in their wrappings, and talked her through the process with the patient specificity of a man who had done this 200 times. The calf's mouth, the bottle, the angle, the pressure. The calf resisted. Of course she resisted. She was scared and sick, and the world had not been gentle with her in her first week of life. Willa held on. She talked to the animal in a low, continuous voice, not words exactly, just sound, the kind of thing her mother had done when Willa was small and feverish. "There," Eli said when the calf finally latched. "Don't stop. Keep the angle." "I have her," Willa said. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah," he said. "You do." When the bottle was empty, and the calf had folded herself into the corner of the pen with the unfocused contentment of the newly fed Willa, sat back on her heels and looked at Eli. "Will she make it?" she asked. "Better odds than she had an hour ago." He looked at Willa steadily. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He shrugged one shoulder. "Someone who'd be gone in 3 weeks. Willa stood brushing her skirt off with complete composure. "I'll be back to check on her before supper," she said, and went inside to wash her hands. Lucas came back from town that afternoon with a look on his face. She was starting to recognize the particular set of his jaw that meant something had gone sideways, and he was processing it before he spoke. She put coffee on. She didn't ask. He sat at the kitchen table for a full minute before he said anything. "Alderman's selling," he said. She turned from the stove. "The boarding house. The land." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "The 300 acres east of his property that borders my north fence line. He's selling to whoever gets there first with money, which in this county means it'll be Harlan Croft." Willa had heard the name. Copper Creek was small enough that names circulated without introduction. Harlan Croft was the owner of the Consolidated Land Company that had been buying up acreage on the east side of the territory for 2 years. Lucas had mentioned him twice in passing, each time with the careful neutrality of a man keeping his actual opinion under tight control. "What does that mean for the double R?" she asked. "My north water access runs through that easement," he said. "If Croft buys it, he can challenge the access rights. It's been informal, a handshake with Alderman's father 20 years ago. Nothing recorded at the land office." "Is that legal? Challenging an established easement?" Lucas looked at her. "Depends who's doing the challenging and what the judge had for breakfast." Willa sat down across from him. "Have you spoken to anyone about recording it now, filing the easement formally? That's what I went to the land office about today." He paused. "Silas Pratt, the county recorder, says the paperwork requires Alderman's signature and a survey which takes 2 weeks minimum, and Alderman's already in talks with Croft." She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking, and she knew she was perhaps overstepping the boundaries of her actual position here, but she could not look at a problem she could see clearly and pretend she couldn't see it. "Does Alderman owe you anything?" she said. "Any favor, any standing debt?" Lucas frowned. "He borrowed equipment from me last fall, returned it." "Did he return it in the same condition he borrowed it?" Lucas's frown deepened. The harrow had a bent tooth. "Did he account for that?" "Said he would. Hasn't." Willa looked at him. "That's a conversation with Alderman that isn't about the land. That's a conversation about the harrow and the principle of returning things as you found them. And somewhere in that conversation you mentioned that you'd appreciate the 2 weeks it takes to file the easement survey before he signs anything." Lucas stared at her. "You're not asking him to not sell," she said. "You're asking him to give you 2 weeks. That's a different conversation, and it costs him nothing. The silence stretched for 4 seconds. 5. You came up with that in 30 seconds, he said. I came up with it while the coffee was brewing, she said, and got up to pour him a second cup. He rode to Alderman's the next morning. He came back with 2 weeks. The Founders' Day celebration was 3 weeks out, and Willa knew about it primarily because Carson mentioned it with the barely contained excitement of a young man who had not had occasion to dance in several months. She had been at the ranch for 16 days by then, long enough that the kitchen ran without her having to think about it, long enough that she knew which board on the back step needed avoiding, long enough that she had learned Lucas Reed had a habit of reading on the porch after supper, that she had stopped trying not to find peaceful. You'll come to Founders' Day, Carson said. It wasn't quite a question. I imagine so, she said. There's dancing, he said. And Mrs. Pollard makes a peach cobbler that'll rearrange your priorities. That's high praise. It's honest praise. He hesitated. There'll be a lot of people asking questions. About you. He stopped. A small town? She finished. Yes, ma'am. She thought about what Lucas had said the first day about the story writing itself. She had been constructing the counter-narrative quietly, not with declarations, just with presence. With being seen at the general store. With nodding to Mrs. Alderman on the street on the 2 occasions she'd been to town. With being simply a person going about her business rather than a woman with a story attached. But Founders' Day would be different. Founders' Day was the whole town in one place. She found Lucas at the fence line that evening. Founders' Day, she said. He kept working the wire. I know. We should talk about it. I know that too. He tied off the section he was working on and turned to face her. People will want to meet you properly. Women from town especially, they'll ask you about Boston, about how we met, about... I can handle questions, she said. I know you can. I'm not worried about that. He paused. I'm wondering if any of this is harder than it looks for you, being someone you're not. She thought about that honestly. I'm not being someone I'm not, she said. I'm a woman on a ranch in Arizona managing a household. That part's real. The circumstances around it are complicated. Complicated, he said. The word sounded different in his voice, more weighted. Lucas. She said it directly. I agreed to this. I'm not asking you to apologize for the situation. I'm asking you to go to Founders' Day with me and tell anyone who asks that we met in Santa Fe. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. All right, she said, and went back to the house. She did not examine the way her heart had been beating slightly faster than usual for the last 3 minutes. There was no profit in that examination. The night before Founders' Day, Eli knocked on the kitchen door. He was holding something. She looked at it, a folded piece of dark blue fabric, soft with age. It was Eleanor's, he said. Lucas's mother. She wore it for the Founders' Day the year before she got sick. He turned it over in his hands. Lucas doesn't know I kept it out when the rest was sorted. Thought maybe I don't know what I thought. He held it out. Willa looked at it, at him. Eli, it's just a shawl, he said gruffly. It gets cold in the evenings out here even in summer. Practical. She took it from him. It was beautiful deep blue wool, soft and well made. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded once, hat already heading toward the door. Don't read into it, he said and left. She stood there holding Eleanor Reed's shawl for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully and set it on the chair for tomorrow. Founders' Day was loud and crowded and smelled like wood smoke and fry bread and horses, and Willa walked into it beside Lucas Reed wearing his mother's shawl and felt for the first time since Boston something adjacent to belonging. Not fully, not yet, but adjacent. The introductions came quickly, too quickly in a wave. Reverend and Mrs. Holt, the Pollard family whose peach cobbler Carson had not oversold. Dr. Ambrose and his wife Clara, who shook Willa's hand with the firm grip of a woman who expected other women to have opinions and respected it. the feed store owner, the schoolteacher Miss Avery, who was 24 and sharp-eyed, and looked at Willa with the complicated expression of a young woman recognizing in another woman choices she hadn't made yet. "How are you finding Arizona?" Clara Ambrose asked with her hand still around Willa's. "I'm finding it larger than I expected," Willa said, "and more willing to surprise me." Clara laughed a real one. "That's the best description of it I've ever heard." She looked at Lucas. "Where have you been hiding her?" "The ranch," Lucas said. "Mostly." "Don't keep her out there," Clara said firmly. "We need women with sense in this town. We are suffering from a shortage." Willa met Lucas's eyes over Clara's shoulder. Something quick passed between them, shared amusement, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that implies a shared language already in formation. She looked away first. And Walton was there. She had expected it. It was a small town. She had told herself she had expected it, but the actual sight of him across the crowded space still did something unpleasant to her pulse, and she made herself breathe through it. He was with a woman younger than Willa, brown-haired, with the careful expression of someone trying to make a good impression. She was standing close to Walton in the way of someone who wanted to appear at ease and wasn't quite. "Don't," Lucas said quietly at her shoulder. She turned to look at him. "Don't what?" "Don't do what your face is doing." "What is my face doing?" "Calculating," he said. "Whatever you're calculating, he's not worth it." She turned back to the room. Walton had seen her. His eyes had passed over her, and then to Lucas, and then away, with the pointed deliberateness of a man who had decided on the strategy of aggressive non-acknowledgement. "I'm not calculating," Willa said. "I'm observing. The difference being, observing has no action attached to it." She turned to accept a cup of lemonade from Carson, who had materialized helpfully at her elbow. "He brought someone." "Word is he's courting the Hendry girl," Carson said, and then looked slightly alarmed at himself for offering unsolicited gossip. "Good," Willa said. "I hope she's what he asked for." She said it mildly. She meant it mildly. And she turned back to Clara Ambrose's conversation and did not look in Walton's direction again. It was Lucas who found her an hour later at the edge of the crowd. She hadn't meant to end up there. She'd been moving through the space, talking to people, managing the introductions with what she thought was reasonable competence. And then the noise and the bodies and the accumulated weight of performing normalcy for 3 hours had pressed against her in a way she hadn't anticipated, and she'd found the edge of things almost without deciding to. He handed her a glass of water. He stood beside her, not talking. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I just needed a minute." "Take the minute." She drank the water. The crowd noise pressed and receded. She became aware that Lucas was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, which was the specific detail her mind chose to catalog at this particular moment, which was unhelpful. "You're wearing her shawl," he said. She went still. "Eli," she said. "He told me he gave it to you." Lucas's voice was careful, quiet. "He doesn't give things away. He kept it for 3 years. She didn't know what to say to that. She looked at the edge of the blue fabric where it rested against her arm. "I'll give it back if—" "No," Lucas said. "That's not no. I'm glad he did." He paused. "She would have liked you." It was the same thing Carson had said from a completely different direction, and it did something to her that she was not prepared for. She pressed her lips together and looked at the crowd. "That's twice in 2 weeks someone has said that to me," she managed. "We're a repetitive bunch," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and they were standing close together at the edge of a Founders' Day celebration in Copper Creek, Arizona. And something shifted between them that was quiet and significant and not yet named. Walton chose that moment to approach. She saw him coming. She kept her face still. She felt Lucas register it too, felt the small shift in his posture. Nothing aggressive, just present, alert. "Wilhelmina," Walton said. He looked at Lucas. "Read." "Walton," Lucas said. "I wanted to." Walton stopped. He seemed to have had an opening planned, and then arrived to find the situation different than he'd imagined it. Willa standing easy. Lucas beside her. The shawl. Whatever he'd come to say had been framed around a different version of her. "You seem well," he finally said. "I am," she said. "The ranch suits you." "It does." He looked at Lucas again. Something passed over his face, the specific expression of a man who has made a decision he's decided was correct and is looking at evidence that suggests otherwise. His jaw tightened. "I acted hastily at the station," he said to her. "I want you to know that." The whole crowd was about 8 feet away. No one was listening. It didn't matter. "Yes," she said. "You did." "If I'd had more time to—" "Mr. Walton," she kept her voice completely even. "I appreciate you saying so, and I wish you and Miss Hendry well. I genuinely do." She held his eyes. "But I'd like to get back to my husband now." Walton looked at Lucas one more time. Then he nodded once and walked away. Willa didn't watch him go. "My husband," Lucas said after a moment. "We agreed on Santa Fe," she said. "We did." He was quiet. "You all right?" She thought about the question honestly. "Yes," she said, and then, because it was true, more than I expected to be. He offered her his arm to walk back into the crowd. She took it. And if her hand stayed on his arm for longer than strictly necessary, once they were back among people, she decided that was simply the mathematics of the situation. Of being two people playing a part that had started to feel in its smallest moments less like playing and more like something else entirely. Something she didn't have a name for yet, something she wasn't ready to name, but something that was there unmistakably like basil seedlings in the corner of a neglected garden, small and pale and stubbornly quietly alive. The easement survey came back clean. Lucas rode to the land office on the 14th day of Alderman's grace period. With the paperwork, Willa had helped him organize every reference to the original handshake agreement. 2 letters from neighboring ranchers confirming the water access had been in continuous use, and a timeline she'd reconstructed from the ranch ledgers going back 11 years. Silas Pratt looked at the stack, looked at Lucas, and said it was the most organized filing he'd processed in 3 years. Alderman signed. The easement was recorded on a Tuesday morning, and Lucas came home that evening and set a paper bag on the kitchen table without a word. Inside it were 2 lemons, expensive, impractical, clearly purchased from the general store at a price that made no sense for a working ranch, and a note that said only, "For the cobbler you mentioned." Willa looked at the lemons for a long moment. Then she made the cobbler, and she did not say anything about the lemons, and Lucas ate 2 portions and declared it the best thing that had come out of that kitchen, which Eli immediately disputed on behalf of the biscuits, which became a 10-minute argument that Carson refereed with great seriousness, and Willa sat at her end of the table and thought, This is what I didn't know I was looking for." She did not say that either. She had gotten very good at not saying things. "That's okay." The cattle rustling started on a Wednesday. Or rather, they found out about it on a Wednesday, which meant it had probably been happening for longer. Carson came in from the south pasture count with numbers that didn't add up, and Lucas went out to verify, and came back with a jaw set so tight Willa could see the muscle working in it from across the room. "How many?" she said. 11 head confirmed. He pulled his hat off and set it on the table. "Could be more. The count on the far section's been sloppy. I should have caught it earlier." "You can't count every head every day," she said. "I can count better than I did." He sat down, stood up again, sat down. He was a man who processed trouble by moving through it, and right now he didn't have anywhere to move. "The tracks go north toward the Croft property line." She looked at him. "You think it's Croft?" "I think the timing is interesting," he said carefully. "Easement recorded 2 weeks ago. Now this. That's not evidence." "No," he said. "It's not." He pressed both hands flat on the table. "I need to ride out tonight with Eli and check the north fence. I'll be back by morning. And Carson? Carson stays here. He looked at her directly. You'll be alone in the house. I don't anticipate any trouble, but I want you to know where the rifle is. She had known where the rifle was since the third day. She had also on the fourth day taken it out to the back field and fired it twice to understand how it handled a fact she had not volunteered. I know where it is, she said. He held her gaze for a moment. The bolt's on your door. Lucas. She kept her voice level. Go find your cattle. I'll manage the house. He went. The house was louder when he wasn't in it. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She hadn't realized how much of the nighttime silence of the ranch she'd been interpreting through the knowledge that he was nearby until he wasn't. The same sounds, the cattle, the wind, the structural settling, had a different quality when she was the only one in the building. She did not go to bed. She finished the mending she'd been putting off and went through the pantry inventory for the week and wrote 3 letters she'd been meaning to write. And at some point after midnight, she made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with the lamp down low and let herself think about things she usually kept at arm's length during the day. She thought about Lucas standing at the edge of Founder's Day with his arm out. She thought about the lemons. She thought about the way he'd told her once that she didn't need him to interfere, and how that had sat differently inside her than any compliment she'd been given in the previous 5 years. She thought about what Clara Ambrose had said to her last week when they'd run into each other at the dry goods store. That man has been holding this county together with fence wire and stubbornness since his mother died. It is remarkable what a decent meal and someone to talk to will do for a person. Clara had said it lightly. Willa had carried it heavily. She did not know what she was doing. She knew what the arrangement was. She was a housekeeper with a fiction layered over her situation for protection. She knew that clearly. She also knew that the fiction had started wearing thin at the edges, not because it was failing publicly, but because she was finding it harder to feel the boundary between what was constructed and what was real. She was still sitting at the table when she heard the horse in the yard at 5 in the morning. She was on her feet before she'd decided to move. It was Lucas. Just Lucas. Eli had stayed out on the fence line to track the trail further north. Lucas came in with dried mud on his boots and the look of a man who'd been awake all night and found what he'd feared he'd find. 7 Moorhead, he said. North fence has a cut section. Clean-cut wire cutters, not breakage. That's deliberate, she said. That's deliberate, he agreed. She put coffee on. She put bread on the table from last night. He sat and ate and drank without speaking, and she sat across from him and did not fill the silence with noise, because she had learned that he thought better in quiet, and the thoughts he was working through right now mattered. Finally, he said, I need to talk to the sheriff. Tom Briggs. She'd met Briggs once briefly at Founder's Day. A careful man, politically careful. Is he likely to act on this? He'll make a report. Lucas wrapped both hands around the cup. Whether he acts past that depends on whether there's pressure from Croft's direction. Is there likely to be... Lucas looked at her. Croft owns 2 buildings on Main Street and holds paper on the feed store. He and Briggs have an understanding. What kind of understanding? The kind that doesn't get written down. Willa was quiet for a moment. Dr. Ambrose, she said, and Reverend Holt, and the Pollard family. Those are people in this town who don't owe Croft anything. Yes. If something happened to you to the double R, they'd want to know about it. I'm not asking for charity. I'm not suggesting charity, she said sharper than she intended. She leveled her voice. I'm suggesting that isolated men lose these fights and connected men don't, and you have more connections in this county than you've bothered to use. He looked at her steadily. When did you figure that out? Approximately 36 hours after I arrived, she said. When I realized that Eli and Carson would do anything for you, and you'd never once ask them to do anything except ranch work. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the morning was beginning, she could tell from the quality of the light under the door. Finally, he said, My father handled things himself. That was how he ran the double R. How'd that work out for him? she said. It came out harder than she'd meant. She saw it land. She started to apologize. He died broke, Lucas said quietly. Drought took the herd bank, took the land. He spent the last 2 years building it back, and it almost killed him. He looked at the table. That's why my mother's garden matters to me. She kept going when everything else went. She didn't ask anyone for help either. And she died anyway, Willa said very gently. He looked up at her. I'm sorry, she said. That was true, he said. That was true. He was quiet again. Then, what are you suggesting? She put her hands flat on the table. Tell people what's happening, not as a complaint, as information. Let this town know that someone is cutting fences on the Double R and cattle are walking off the north end toward Croftland. Let them form their own opinions. And if Briggs won't act, then you don't need Briggs, she said. You need a lawyer who knows land law in this territory, and you need your neighbors paying attention, and you need documentation of every head that goes missing with dates and coordinates. She met his eyes. I can do the documentation. I've been doing it already. I started a log when you told me about the first count. He stared at her. You started a log 2 weeks ago, she said. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to alarm you over numbers that might have been a miscounting error. He looked at her for so long that she became aware of the specific quality of his attention. Not assessment this time, not the careful measuring look she'd gotten at the train station. Something different, something that had warmth underneath it. Willa, he said. Don't, she said quickly. I was going to say thank you. She looked away. Oh, a beat. You're welcome. The lawyer's name was Thomas Greer, and he came up from Tucson on the Thursday stage because Clara Ambrose had written to him personally and because Lucas finally, and with some difficulty, had asked for help. Willa made him lunch and sat in on the meeting, which Greer didn't comment on. Clara had apparently briefed him and took notes on everything he said. Greer was 60 precise, with the particular economy of language that belongs to men who are paid by the complexity of what they say rather than the quantity. He went through her documentation log and didn't speak for 4 minutes. This is thorough, he said. It's complete, she said. There's a difference. He looked up from the log. He looked at Lucas. Where did you find her? Train station, Lucas said. Greer looked between them briefly, then returned to the log. You have enough here to open a civil complaint against parties unknown for livestock theft. That gets it on record, combined with the easement filing. He tapped the page. Someone is trying to make this ranch untenable. The question is whether they're doing it with enough fingerprints to prove. Is there a way to find out? Willa asked. You'd need someone on the Croft side willing to talk, Greer said. These operations don't run on one man. There are hired hands, there are go-betweens. He set the log down. Someone always knows something they'd rather not be holding. After Greer left, Eli came to find Lucas in the main room. There's a man, Eli said. Lucas looked up. One of Croft's line riders, Tom Pickett. He was at the Double R 2 seasons ago before Croft hired him away. Eli's hat was tipped all the way back. He's been drinking at the saloon 3 nights running. A man who drinks 3 nights running either has money he's celebrating or trouble he's trying to get ahead of. Lucas and Willa looked at each other. That, Willa said, is useful information. She was not supposed to go to the saloon. That was understood without being stated. But she was also, and this was equally understood though stated even less, not the kind of woman who sat in the kitchen while something important happened 200 yards down the road. What she did was go to the dry goods store, which was next to the saloon, and take slightly longer than necessary to make her purchases and come back past the saloon's side entrance at the exact moment Lucas and Eli were leaving it. Lucas saw her. He said nothing. He fell into step beside her and waited until they were a block away. Pickett talked, he said. She kept walking. What did he say? He's not the one running the operation. He was hired by a man named Delicott Croft's ranch foreman to cut the fence and move the cattle to a holding pen on the far north section. Croft's name never comes up directly. His voice was controlled, tightly controlled. It never comes up directly. But Delicott reports to Croft. Everyone on that property reports to Croft. Will Pickett say that to Greer? Lucas was quiet. He might. He's scared. He didn't know the full scope of it when Delicott hired him, and now he's in far enough that walking away feels dangerous. He needs to feel like walking toward something is safer than walking away from it, Willa said. Greer can talk to him about, it's not a legal question, she said. It's a human question. He's afraid. Someone needs to sit with him and make the case that the side he's on right now is more dangerous than the alternative. She paused. I can do that. Lucas stopped walking. Willa, I taught school for 2 years, she said. Before that, I sat with my father through 2 years of illness and managed every difficult conversation he couldn't have. I know how to sit with someone who is afraid and help them make a decision. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking you to send me in there alone. I'm saying I can help. He looked at her. She looked back. The street was quiet around them mid-morning, most of the town busy with its own affairs. Friday, he said. Greer's coming back Friday. I'll ask if he thinks it's useful. Ask him, she said, and started walking again. He caught up to her in 3 strides. You were supposed to be at the dry goods store. I was at the dry goods store, she said. I also walked past things on my way back to the buckboard. A pause. Did you hear anything? Through the wall of a saloon numb. She glanced at him sideways. I'm capable of restraint, Lucas. I'm starting to believe that's not true, he said, and she heard the careful amusement underneath it, and she did not look at him, because if she looked at him right now, she was not certain what her face would do. Friday came. Greer came with it. Pickett agreed to a formal statement contingent on certain protections Greer outlined with the precise language of a man who had done this before. It wasn't everything. It was one man's account implicating a foreman with Croft's name, still 1 layer removed. But it was something. It was the first crack in the structure Croft had been building. And then, 2 hours after Greer left with Pickett's statement in his case, Harlan Croft came to the Double R. He came without ceremony, just a horse and his own presence, which was considerable. He was 55, built heavy with the particular confidence of a man who had won most of the arguments he'd been in. He tied his horse at the rail and knocked on the door as though he owned it, which was Willa suspected precisely the feeling he wanted to convey. She opened the door. He looked at her with the flat assessment of a man cataloging an unexpected variable. I'm here to see Lucas Reed, he said. I'll let him know you're here, she said and left Croft on the porch. Lucas came to the door. She stayed in the main room out of sight but not out of earshot, and she made no apology for it. Reed, Croft said. I understand you've been having trouble with your cattle. I have, Lucas said. Unfortunate thing? This territory attracts a certain element. Croft's voice was smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man who had practiced being reasonable until it felt like a weapon. I wanted to offer if there's anything my operation can do to assist. My men cover a lot of ground up on the north section. I appreciate the offer, Lucas said. Of course. A pause. I also wanted to mention Alderman's land, the parcel we discussed. I understand the easement question's been resolved. I want you to know I have no interest in complicating your water access. Never did. Good to know, Lucas said. I think neighbors should work together, Croft said. I think there's enough land in this territory for everyone. What I don't like to see is misunderstanding between men who could be working in the same direction. Willa pressed her lips together. What direction is that? Lucas asked. Progress, Croft said simply. Growth. This county is going to expand significantly in the next decade. The men who hold significant acreage when that happens will be in a very comfortable position. A pause. I've been acquiring, consolidating. I'd be willing to discuss partnership arrangements with a property like the Double R. Formal ones. Mutually beneficial. A long silence. I'll think about it, Lucas said. Of course. She could hear the smile in it. No urgency, just something to consider. Footsteps on the porch. Give my regards to your wife. The horse left. Lucas came inside. He looked at Willa. He knows about Pickett, she said. He knows about Pickett. Lucas agreed. He came to make the offer before the statement becomes a problem for him. If you're his partner, you have reasons not to pursue the complaint. That's right. Are you going to think about it? He looked at her with an expression that was almost offended. No. Good. She turned back to the kitchen. Supper in an hour. Willa, she stopped. I'm not going to let him have this ranch, Lucas said. I want you to know that, whatever he does next. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides, and the look of a man who is saying one thing and meaning several others, and she understood that she understood it completely because she had been doing the same thing for 5 weeks. I know, she said. He stopped. Tried again. I wanted you to know. She looked at him for a moment. Looked at the man who had picked up her trunk at a train station and driven her 5 miles in silence, and put a bolt on her door, and gotten her lemons for no practical reason, and stood at the edge of a crowd, and offered her his arm. Lucas, she said, I'm not going anywhere. He nodded. Once. The way he nodded when something had settled that he'd been carrying without knowing it. She went back to the kitchen. She kept her hands very busy for the next several minutes, and she concentrated on the bread she was making, and she did not think about the look on his face, or not much, or not as much as she wanted to. Outside, the Arizona evening was coming in with its particular quality of light and distance and stubbornness, and somewhere out in the south, Pen the little red calf who had a name. Now, though no one had officially assigned one, but everyone called her Penny, was taking her evening feed without assistance. Small things, real things. Things that were starting quietly and without permission to feel like hers. Greer filed the civil complaint on a Monday, and by Wednesday the whole county knew about it. That was the thing about small towns. Information didn't travel. It detonated. Willa had been at the dry goods store on Wednesday afternoon when she heard 2 women behind her at the counter discussing the Reed complaint against parties unknown with the particular relish of people handling a story they found satisfying. She bought her flour and her salt and said nothing, but she walked back to the buckboard with the distinct feeling that something had shifted in the atmosphere of Copper Creek, and she wasn't yet certain in which direction it would settle. Lucas was calm about it. That was his way. He processed danger quietly, the way a good horse reads a situation without shying. And he told her Wednesday evening that calm was the right posture, regardless of what Croft did next. He'll push back, Lucas said. He's not a man who absorbs a challenge without answering it. What does answering look like for a man like Croft? She asked. Pressure. On the people around me. He looked at her directly. On you possibly. What kind of pressure? Reputation. Talk. He didn't look away. You're the most visible part of my life that he can reach. She thought about that honestly. She thought about what her reputation actually consisted of, a fiction layered over a real situation, a story about Santa Fe that held up because no one had pulled hard enough on it yet. She thought about what happened if someone pulled. Let them talk, she said. Willa. Lucas. I arrived in this town as a woman who'd been rejected on a public platform. My reputation started from a deficit. Whatever Croft says about me cannot be worse than what was already said at that station, and I survived that. She met his eyes. Don't worry about me. Worry about the legal case. He looked at her for a long moment. You're the least worrying person I know, he said, and that worries me more than anything else. She almost smiled. That's very nearly a compliment. It was meant as one, he said, and went back to his paperwork, and Willa turned to the dishes and allowed herself privately the small thing that had been happening in her chest for weeks now, whenever he spoke to her like that. The pressure came Thursday. Not to her, to Carson. He came in for the noon meal with a look on his face she'd learned to read, the particular expression of a young man carrying something he wasn't sure how to put down. He ate half his food. He moved it around. He finally set his fork down. "Someone talked to me in town this morning," he said. "One of Croft's men, Mullins. You might have seen him at Founders Day, big fellow with the red vest." Lucas looked up from the end of the table. "He said he wanted to give me friendly information," Carson continued. "He said it like the phrase tasted wrong. He said there were stories going around about Mrs. Reed, about how she and Lucas met. He said some people were saying the marriage wasn't—" He stopped. "Wasn't legal." The table went quiet. Eli's hat tipped back. Willa set her coffee cup down. "What did you say?" Lucas asked. His voice was very level. "I told him he was welcome to say that to your face," Carson said. "And then I walked away." He looked at Willa. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I thought you should know." "You did exactly right," Willa said. Her voice was steady. Her hands under the table were not. "Thank you for telling us." After the men went back out, she and Lucas sat at the table. "It's starting," she said. "Yes. If someone files a formal challenge to the marriage, to the arrangement, what happens legally?" Lucas was quiet for the moment. "In this territory, a common law marriage has standing if both parties present themselves as married. We've done that." He paused. "But if someone pushes for documentation and there's no documentation—" "There's no documentation," she said. "No. Because there was no Santa Fe." "No." They sat with that. Outside, she could hear Eli and Carson at the fence, the ordinary sounds of the ranch continuing around a problem that was anything but ordinary. "We could fix that," Lucas said, quietly. "To the table." She looked at him. He looked at the table another moment, then up at her. "I'm not asking you to do something you don't want," he said. "I want to be clear about that. What I'm saying is, there's a practical solution, and I'm putting it on the table. You can say no." Her heart was doing something she could not afford to acknowledge in this moment. "You're talking about an actual marriage. I'm talking about going to Reverend Holt and making the thing we've been pretending to have into something that holds up in court." He held her gaze. "For the ranch. For your protection. For the legal case against Croft, because a contested marriage gives his lawyers something to pull on." He paused. "Those are practical reasons." "They are," she said. "There might be other reasons," he said. "But I'm not going to put those on the table unless you want them there." She looked at him, at this man who had picked up a stranger's trunk and driven her through the desert in silence and learned not to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, and who had just offered her something enormous and wrapped it in practicality so she would have room to say no if she needed to. She breathed in. She breathed out. "Put them on the table," she said. He looked at her. "The other reasons," she said. "Put them on the table." He was quiet for 3 seconds that felt considerably longer. "I think about you," he said, "approximately all the time. I think that's been true since about the 8th day, which is—" He stopped. "I'm not a man who says things well." "You're doing fine," she said. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "That's the plainest way I can put it. I don't want you to have an exit and use it. I want—" He stopped again. "I want this to be a real thing. I want the thing that already feels real to be something that actually is." She pressed her lips together. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. "The bolt's still on my door," she said. "I know. I put it there because I needed to know it was there, not because I was afraid of you." "I know that too," he said. "I put it there for the same reason." She frowned. "You put it there so you'd know it was there." "So you'd know it was there," he said. "So you'd know I wasn't going to make this into something you didn't choose." He paused. "You had a lot of things happen to you that you didn't choose. I didn't want to be another one." Something cracked open in her chest. Not painfully, the opposite. The way a window opens in a room that's been closed too long. "Lucas," she said. "Yeah. Ask me properly." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that she had never seen on it before. Not quite uncertainty, not quite vulnerability, but the particular expression of a careful man standing at the edge of something he can't plan for. "Wilhelmina Dawson," he said. "Would you marry me? For real? All the reasons." She took a breath. "Yes," she said. "All the reasons." They went to Reverend Holt the following Saturday morning. It was not a ceremony by any elaborate definition. No guests, no flowers, none of the trappings that Willa had once distantly imagined for this kind of occasion. Clara Ambrose stood as witness because Lucas had thought to ask her, and because Clara had responded to the request by arriving with a small bunch of dried lavender from her own garden, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for news of this kind and found it satisfying. Eli stood on Lucas's side and held his hat in both hands and did not speak, which was the most eloquent thing he could have done. Reverend Holt read the words. They said the words back. When it was over, Clara embraced Willa with the warmth of a woman who intended to be a permanent fixture in her life. And Eli shook Lucas's hand, and Carson, who had not been told in advance, but who appeared in the doorway of the church approximately 2 minutes after it was over. With the look of a man who had figured it out, and Run nearly knocked Willa over with his enthusiasm and apologized for 3 minutes without stopping. Walking back to the buckboard, Lucas's hand was at her back. Not her arm, not the formal escort of a man performing a role. His hand, at her back, the specific quiet claim of a person who intends to be there. She did not say anything about it. She felt it for the entire 5 miles home. Greer sent word the following Tuesday. Croft's lawyer had entered a response to the complaint. It was what Greer had expected denial of involvement suggestion that the livestock losses were the result of Reed's own poor management, a counter-allegation that the easement filing had been obtained under false pretense. "False pretense," Willa repeated. "They're claiming I pressured Alderman," Lucas said. He had the letter flat on the table. "That the Harrow debt was used as coercion. That's..." She stopped. "That was my suggestion, the Harrow conversation." "I know. If they make that stick..." "They won't make it stick," Lucas said. Alderman signed willingly. He'll say so. But there was a tightness under his voice that she recognized now, the tightness of a man who was less certain than his words. "Will he?" she said. "If Croft leans on him." Lucas was quiet. She sat down. She thought it through clearly the way she'd taught herself to think not from the feeling, but from the structure. Alderman is selling to Croft. He needs Croft's goodwill to complete the sale at a good price. If Croft tells him the price drops, unless Alderman revises his account of that conversation. "Then we have a problem," Lucas said. "We need to talk to Alderman before Croft does," she said. "Today." "He's not going to want..." "I'll go," she said. Lucas looked at her. "No." "Lucas." "Not because I think you can't handle it," he said immediately. "Because Alderman is a man who responds to men. That is a frustrating truth about Edwin Alderman that I cannot change before this afternoon. If you go, he'll feel managed and he'll resist." He stood. "I'll go." "Then go now," she said. "Before noon." He was already getting his hat. He came back 2 hours later. She heard the horse and was at the door before he dismounted. She read his face before he spoke, and what she read was not good. "Croft got there first," he said. She stepped back from the door. He came inside. "Alderman is revising his account," he said. "He's saying the conversation about the Harrow was his word implied pressure, that he felt he had to agree to the waiting period." He set his hat on the table. "Greer says without Alderman's original testimony, the easement challenge becomes viable again." "The easement we already filed," she said. "It's recorded. Recorded easements can be challenged if the circumstances of filing are contested." His voice was controlled. She could hear what was beneath it. "Greer's good. But Croft's lawyer has been doing this for 20 years in this territory, and he knows which judges listen to which arguments. Willa stood in the middle of the kitchen and breathed through what she was feeling, which was fury. Clean, productive fury, the kind that her mother had always called the only useful emotion because it moved forward instead of inward. Pickett's statement, she said. Still solid, but it implicates Delicott, not Croft, directly. Is there anything that goes directly to Croft? Lucas looked at her. Greer thinks there might be. The holding pen where the cattle were moved, it's on Croft's land. If we can prove Croft knew they were there, that's direct involvement. He paused. But we'd need someone on his property to confirm it, and the only person willing to talk was Pickett, and Pickett only saw as far as Delicott. She thought for a moment. Mullins, she said. Lucas frowned. Croft's man who approached Carson. He approached Carson to pass a message, she said. That means Delicott or Croft sent him. He's an intermediary. She met Lucas's eyes. Intermediaries hear things. Intermediaries are also by nature people who are used as tools and don't always appreciate it. She paused. Carson made a decent impression on him, or enough of one that Mullins chose him specifically for the approach. That's a relationship, however thin. You want Carson to talk to Mullins. I want Carson to have a drink with Mullins at the saloon and not talk about anything important, she said, and see what Mullins talks about instead. Lucas looked at her for a long time. How do you do that? He said. Do what? See around corners like that. She thought about her father's office, about 2 years of managing conversations he was too ill to have about 30 children in a classroom who required understanding before they required instruction. I learned, she said simply, the same way you learned to read a fence line. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to Carson. Carson, to his credit, understood immediately what was being asked and why, and agreed without drama. He was, Willa thought, going to be an exceptional man in about 10 years, when he'd had time to grow into his own instincts. He went to the saloon Thursday evening. He came back Friday morning with the look of a man who had stayed up too late and found something worth staying up for. Mullins didn't say it directly, Carson said, but he said enough. He was at the kitchen table accepting coffee from Willa with both hands around the cup. He said Delicott's been nervous. Said Delicott made a trip up to Croft's house 2 weeks ago and came out looking like a man who'd been handed something he didn't want. He paused. And then he said, and this is the part he said, Croft keeps his real books separate, not at the land office, at his house in the study. He said every man who works close to Croft knows it. Lucas, who had been standing in the doorway, came fully into the room. Real books. 2 sets, Carson said. The ones that go to the county and the ones that say what's actually happening. A silence fell over the kitchen. Willa was the first to speak. Greer needs to know this. This isn't enough to get a court order, Lucas said. A saloon conversation. It's not evidence, she agreed, but it tells us what exists. And if Greer can subpoena Croft's records, all his records with a broad enough scope, and Croft can't produce the second set without exposing himself, he either hands them over and incriminates himself, or he destroys them, and that's its own problem, Lucas said slowly. Yes. She looked at him. It's a pressure point, not a solution. But we don't need a solution today. We need Croft to feel the walls moving. Eli, who had come in during this without anyone noticing, said from the doorway, Cornered men make mistakes. Yes, Willa said. They do. Lucas looked around the room at Eli, at Carson, at Willa, with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful assessment, not the contained worry. Something that was, she thought, something close to the feeling she'd had at Founder's Day, when she'd first said the word belonging to herself and been frightened by how much she meant it. All right, he said. I'll ride to Tucson tomorrow and talk to Greer in person. Take the documentation log, Willa said. I updated it through yesterday. I will. He looked at her. Come with me. She blinked. To Tucson. It's a day's ride. We'd stay overnight. He said it matter-of-factly, but she had learned to read the things underneath his matter-of-fact voice. Greer should meet you, You've built half this case. He should know who he's working with. Eli and Carson can manage the ranch for 2 days, Eli said from the doorway helpfully. Nobody asked you, Lucas said. Didn't need asking, Eli said, and went back outside. Willa looked at Lucas. He looked at her. She thought about Tucson, a city, a hotel 2 days away from the ranch that had been her entire world for 6 weeks, and the man sitting across from her who had just said, with complete simplicity, "Come with me." "All right," she said. They left before dawn the next day. The ride to Tucson was long enough that pretending not to talk was impractical, which was, she suspected, part of why he'd asked her. They talked about the case for the first hour. They talked about the ranch for the second. Somewhere in the third hour, with the desert spreading out around them in the particular quality of early morning, they stopped talking about anything in particular and started talking about everything else. He told her about his father. Not the myth of him, not the ledger entry version, but the actual man who had been funny in private and terrible at apologies, and who had once driven 40 miles in the wrong direction rather than admit he'd misread a map. She laughed at that, a real one unguarded. He looked at her when she laughed like that. She caught him looking. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You should do that more. Laugh. Like that. Like you forgot to be careful about it." She looked at the road ahead. "I spent a long time being careful," she said. "Careful about money. Careful about work. Careful about what I wanted and what was practical and what a woman in my position could reasonably expect." She paused. "Being careful is exhausting." "What would you do if you stopped?" he said. "Not pushing. Just asking." She thought about it honestly. "I'd plant the whole south field in lavender," she said. "Not because it's practical, because Clara Ambrose had a bunch of it at our wedding, and it was the most beautiful thing in the room, and I've been thinking about it since." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll fence the south field in the fall," he said. "Keeps the cattle out." She turned to look at him. He was watching the road with the very slight adjustment at the corner of his mouth that she now recognized as the thing his face did instead of smiling fully. "Lucas Reed," she said. "Yeah. You are a good man." He kept his eyes on the road. The line at the corner of his mouth deepened. He didn't say anything because he didn't need to, because they had both reached the point where the silence between them carried as much as the words and sometimes more. She turned back to the road. She let herself feel the morning air and the movement of the horse and the fact of him beside her, and she thought, This is what I couldn't have planned for. This is the thing that doesn't come from being careful." Greer met them at his office that afternoon. He listened to everything. He looked at the updated log. He asked Willa 4 questions, precise, specific, the kind that told her he'd already read her documentation carefully and was verifying his conclusions rather than forming them. At the end, he sat back and looked at them both. "The 2-ledger allegation," he said. "It's useful, not as evidence, but as a frame. If I subpoena Croft's financial records and structure the request broadly enough, he has to respond to everything or move to quash, and moving to quash signals to the judge that there's something to protect." "Will this judge read it that way?" Lucas asked. Greer looked at him steadily. "Judge Harmon? Yes. He's 64, and he's watched Croft buy influence in this county for 15 years, and he doesn't like it." He paused. "He also doesn't like sloppy cases. So what you're giving me?" He tapped the documentation log. "This needs to be airtight." "It is," Lucas said. Greer looked at Willa. "You built this?" "I organized what was already there," she said. "No," Greer said simply. "You built this." He looked between them. "I'll file the subpoena Monday. After that, we wait to see what Croft does." What Croft did was arrive at the Double R for the second time on a Wednesday evening 3 days later, and this time he did not knock. He dismounted, walked past the front door to the side of the house where Lucas was working at the fence, and he stood there with his hands in his coat pockets and the expression of a man who had just had a very uncomfortable conversation with his own lawyer. Willa was at the kitchen window. She watched. "This stops now," Croft said. "Whatever you think you're building with Greer, it stops now, or I make it very expensive for you to continue." Lucas set down his tools. He turned to face Croft. "Is that a legal threat or a personal one?" "It's a practical one," Croft said. "I've been doing business in this county for 20 years, Reed. I've seen men try to take me on before. I'm still here. They're not." "What happened to them?" Lucas asked, calmly. "They ran out of money," Croft said. "Legal cases are expensive, and you're a small operation." "I'm a small operation with documentation, 2 witnesses, a recorded easement, and a lawyer who happens to dislike you personally," Lucas said. "That's a different situation than the men you're thinking of." Croft looked at him. Then slowly, he looked at the kitchen window. Willa didn't move. "Your wife," Croft said. "Boston woman, came in on the train." His voice was very even. Interesting that no one in Santa Fe remembers a Reed wedding. The air changed. Lucas took one step toward Croft. Just one. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying people in Copper Creek ask questions," Croft said. "And I'm saying a marriage that doesn't hold up makes a complicated situation for a man trying to claim legal standing in a county property dispute. Our marriage is recorded with Reverend Holt," Lucas said. 3 weeks ago. Witnessed." 3 weeks ago," Croft said. "Yes." He let the implication sit there. Lucas held his ground. "If you have something to say, Harlan, say it to Greer. If you have nothing to say, get off my land." The silence ran for 5 seconds. 10. Croft turned and walked to his horse. He mounted without hurrying. He looked back once, not at Lucas, at the kitchen window, at Willa. She held his gaze until he rode away. Then she set down the cup she'd been holding and realized her hand had been gripping it hard enough to leave marks on her palm, and she breathed through it in and out until she was steady. Lucas came inside. He looked at her. "He's trying to use me," she said. "Our marriage, as the weak point." "He's wrong about it being weak," Lucas said. "He's right that it's recent," she said. "A judge who wanted to find a problem could find one. Judge Harmon won't—" "Lucas." She looked at him directly. "I need you to hear me. I am not fragile about this. I am not frightened about this. But I am telling you clearly if my presence here, my history, the circumstances of how we actually came to be married, if any of that becomes a liability for you. In this case, I need you to tell me, because I can handle it. What I cannot handle is being protected from information I need." He looked at her for a long time. "You're not a liability," he said. "You're the reason we have a case." She pressed her lips together. "Lucas." "No," he said. "I'm being specific, not kind. Without the documentation you built, Greer has a neighbor dispute and a single witness. With it, he has a pattern of conduct, a subpoena target, and enough to make Croft's lawyers work for their fee." He held her gaze. "You did that. Croft came here because he's scared, and he's scared because of what you built. Don't let him make you smaller than you are." She was quiet for a moment. Just a moment. "All right," she said. "Then let's finish it." He nodded, the line at the corner of his mouth, the look in his eyes that she had stopped pretending she didn't know how to name. Outside, the last of the evening was settling over the double R, and the south field was empty and full of possibility. And somewhere in the weeks ahead, lavender would either grow or it wouldn't. And either way, Wilhelmina Reed was staying. She had decided that sometime between a train station and a kitchen table and a church with dried flowers and a long road to Tucson, and she had not needed to announce it because it was simply true. She was staying. This was hers, all of it. Greer filed the subpoena on Monday as promised. By Tuesday afternoon, Croft's lawyer had already moved to quash it. Lucas brought the news home with the particular quality of silence that meant the situation had developed faster than expected, and Willa read it before he said a word. She poured him coffee. She sat down across from him. She waited. "Harmon denied the motion to quash," Lucas said. She looked up. "He denied it in 2 hours," Lucas said. "Greer said that's the fastest he's seen Harmon rule on anything in 15 years. He set the letter flat on the table. "The subpoena stands. Croft has 10 days to produce his financial records. Willa pressed her hands flat on the table. She breathed. That's good. That's very good, Lucas said. Greer thinks Croft's lawyer knows it. He thinks there's going to be a settlement conversation before the 10 days are up. Croft doesn't strike me as a man who settles. Croft doesn't strike me as a man who lets his private books get read by a judge either, Lucas said. One of those things is going to give. She looked at him. What does Greer want us to do? Wait, Lucas said. Hold position. Don't react to anything Croft does in the next 10 days. Don't give him a reason to go back to Harmon with a countercomplaint. He paused. He specifically said don't react. I can do that, she said. I know you can. He looked at her steadily. I'm less certain about myself. She almost smiled. I'll watch your reactions for you. That's what I'm counting on, he said. The 10 days were not quiet. On day 3, someone left a note on the buckboard in town. Unsigned, 3 lines suggesting that the Double R's legal complaint was the work of a woman with a history of financial manipulation and that Lucas Reed was a fool being managed by a Boston schemer. Carson found it. He brought it straight to Willa without reading past the first line, which she appreciated. She read it, folded it, and handed it to Lucas, who read it once and put it in the stove. Don't, she said. He looked at her. Keep it, she said. Give it to Greer. He retrieved it from the stove before it caught. He was holding it at the edge, where the paper had started to brown. You want to use an anonymous insult as evidence. I want to use a pattern of intimidation as evidence, she said. 1 note is nothing. 2 notes the approach to Carson Croft's visit, that's a pattern. She looked at him. Don't burn anything else. He set the note on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man recalibrating his instincts. Noted, he said. On day 5, Alderman came to the ranch. He came alone and on foot, which surprised her. His property was 2 miles north, and a man didn't walk 2 miles in Arizona heat without a reason he didn't want witnessed. She was in the kitchen garden when she heard the gate. She stood up. She looked at him. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was now finding the actual moment harder than the rehearsal. Mr. Alderman, she said. Mrs. Reed. He turned his hat in his hands. Is he available? He's on the south pasture. I can get him if it's urgent. She waited. Is it urgent? Alderman turned his hat again. I told Croft's man something I shouldn't have told him, he said. About the Harrow conversation. I said it felt like pressure. He stopped. It didn't. Lucas never pressured me. I was Croft's man, made it sound like I'd have problems with the sale if I didn't. He stopped again. I want to correct the record. Willa looked at him carefully. Why now? Because I'm selling my land to a man who just sent someone to tell me what to say in a legal matter, Alderman said, and I've been a stupid old fool about it, and I'd rather be an honest man than a comfortable one. He looked at his hat. I never thought Lucas Reed was anything but straight with me. I shouldn't have said otherwise. She studied him for a long moment. Then, come inside, she said. I'll send Carson for Lucas, and you can tell him yourself, and then you're going to tell Thomas Greer. Alderman nodded. I know. She got him water, and she went to find Carson, and she did not let herself think about how much this changed things until she was standing at the fence waving Carson in, and then she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of feeling it before she put her face back in order. 5 seconds was enough. It had to be. Greer came out from Tucson the following morning. He sat across from Alderman at the kitchen table for 90 minutes while Willa kept coffee coming, and Lucas stayed in the room without saying much, and Eli stood in the doorway in the way he did when he was standing guard without calling it that. When it was over, Greer looked at Lucas with an expression Willa hadn't seen from him before, something close to satisfaction, which on Greer's precise face was the equivalent of a celebration. Alderman's revised statement combined with Pickett's account and your documentation gives me a direct line from the fence cutting to Delicott to Croft's property, he said. The note from the buckboard establishes ongoing intimidation, And the attempted subpoena quash. He paused. A man with clean books doesn't fight that hard to keep them closed. Will Harmon see it that way? Lucas asked. Harmon already sees it that way, Greer said. He denied that motion in 2 hours. He's been waiting for someone to build this case for a long time. He stacked his papers with the careful economy of a man who had a train to catch. I expect a settlement communication before the subpoena deadline. My advice, don't take the first number. After Greer left, Carson punched the air in the yard with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy that made Willa laugh out loud, which made Eli tell Carson to stop embarrassing himself, which made Carson grin even wider. Lucas found her at the kitchen garden that evening. She was at the basil corner. The 3 seedlings she'd found in the first week, now substantial enough to harvest from, and she had her hands in the soil because she thought better with her hands in the soil, which was something she had discovered about herself in Arizona and would not have predicted in Boston. He sat down on the low garden wall. He watched her work. "You did this," he said. She didn't look up. "We did this." Willa. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was looking at her with the full, unguarded version of his face, the one she only saw when he thought she was looking elsewhere, or when something had happened that pushed past his careful management of his own expression. He was not managing it right now. "All right," she said. "I helped." "You built the foundation," he said. "Everything Greer is standing on, you built it. The logs, the pattern, the alderman conversation." He paused. "I had a ranch that was getting picked apart, and I couldn't see clearly enough to stop it. You could." "You could see it," she said. "You just needed someone to help you look at it from a different angle." "That's what I said." She opened her mouth, closed it. "Lucas Reed, that is not what you said." "It is from where I'm sitting," he said, and the line at the corner of his mouth was all the way out now, and she loved him. She had known it for a while, but it arrived clearly in that moment, clean and simple and enormous and completely without panic, which surprised her. She had thought love would feel urgent when it arrived. It didn't. It felt like recognition. "I love you," she said. She said it the way she said most important things, directly without preparation, because preparation gave her too much time to decide not to. He looked at her. "I'm saying it plainly," she said, "because I've spent a long time saying things sideways, and I'm finished with that." "Good," he said. "Because I've been working up to saying it for 6 weeks, and you got there first." He paused. "I love you, significantly. Since approximately the day you found those basil seedlings and looked at them like they were the most important thing you'd ever seen." She looked at the basil. She looked at him. "They were important," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why." She got up from the garden. She walked to where he was sitting, and she stood in front of him, and he reached out and took her hand, both hands around hers, and they stayed like that for a while, without speaking, because there was nothing left to say that the moment wasn't already saying better. The settlement offer came on day 8. It arrived through Greer by way of Croft's lawyer, and it was significant enough that Greer sent a rider rather than waiting for the post. Full acknowledgement of the R's water easement permanent and recorded without challenge. Restitution for the 18 head of cattle confirmed stolen at market rate plus damages. A formal severance of Delicott's employment and Delicott's own written statement implicating the fence-cutting operation. And a clause Greer had pushed hard for this one, prohibiting Croft's Land Company from acquiring any property within 3 miles of the R boundary for a period of 20 years. Lucas read it twice. Then he handed it to Willa. She read it once. "Take it," she said. Greer said, "Don't take the first number." "This isn't a number," she said. "This is everything. Croft saw his books going in front of Harmon, and he gave us everything rather than let that happen." She looked up at him. "If we push further, we get a hearing, we get more publicity, and we get a man who has nothing left to lose." She set the paper down. "We have the ranch protected. We have restitution. We have Delicott's statement for the record. Take it." Lucas was quiet for a long time. "Carson," he called. Carson appeared from the next room with the speed of someone who had not been eavesdropping but had been positioned very nearby. "Sir, ride to town. Tell Greer we'll take the settlement." Carson was gone before the sentence was finished. Eli appeared in the doorway. He looked at Lucas. He looked at Willa. He put his hat back on and said, "Good," and went back to whatever he'd been doing, and that was the Double R's celebration, and it was exactly right. The papers were signed at Greer's office in Tucson on a Friday, with Judge Harmon's clerk present to notarize, and Harlan Croft was not there. His lawyer signed on his behalf, which Greer said was deliberate, which told Willa that Croft was a man who could not stand to be in the room for his own losses. She understood that in a distant way. She had been that person once, the person who believed that not witnessing the hard thing made it less real. She wasn't that person anymore. On the ride home from Tucson, she told Lucas about the morning at the train station, the actual morning, not the version she'd managed for public consumption. The 4 seconds. The letter handed back. The station master going back to his freight manifests. The $12. She had never told anyone the full version. She told him all of it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the road was quiet around them. "I've thought about what I would have done," he said, "if I'd left the depot 20 minutes earlier that day." She looked at him. "You'd have missed me entirely." "I know," he said. "I've thought about that." He looked at the road. 20 minutes. I almost sent Carson for the feed delivery. She sat with that for a moment, the specific vertigo of how close any life comes to being a different life. 20 minutes and a decision about a feed delivery, and she would have been standing on that platform alone. "I'm glad you didn't," she said. "Me too," he said. "More than I can say." She reached over and put her hand over his on the reins. He turned his palm up and held it. They rode home like that. The letter from Margaret arrived 2 weeks after the settlement. Margaret had clearly received Willa's earlier letter, the careful, honest one, and had responded with the particular combination of warmth and practical interrogation that had always characterized Margaret's correspondence. She wanted to know everything. She wanted names, descriptions, evidence of character. She asked 6 questions about Lucas that were each more specific than the last, which made Willa laugh reading them. She wrote back 14 pages. She told Margaret about the train station and the buckboard and the bolt on the door. She told her about the basil seedlings and the ledger and Founder's Day and Eleanor's shawl and the lemons. She told her about Greer and Alderman and Pickett and the note in the stove that she'd had to rescue from burning. She told her about the Tucson road and the lavender plan and the thing she had said in the kitchen garden and the way he'd said it back. She told Margaret, "I came here with $12 and a letter of introduction, and a man gave me back the letter. And then I found out that the letter was the only thing I didn't need." She sealed it and addressed it and held it for a moment before she gave it to Carson to post. Then she went to find her husband. He was at the north fence with Eli, the two of them checking the repaired section that had been cut in the summer, and she walked out to where they were working and stood a moment watching them. These 2 men, one of whom had decided in 40 minutes at a train station that she was worth helping, and the other of whom had held on to a blue shawl for 3 years because he couldn't bear to let go of the woman who'd worn it. Eli saw her first. He tipped his hat and moved down the fence line with elaborate casualness, giving them space in the way he always did, which he would deny doing if asked. Lucas turned. "Penny's walking better," she said. The red calf had been favoring her left rear leg for a week. "I think she's past it." "Good," he said. "The basil in the south corner is ready to cut back before winter." "All right. And I think I'm—" She stopped. He looked at her. The careful, full attention. "I think we're expecting a child," she said. The silence was complete and total for about 3 seconds, and then something happened to Lucas Reed's face that she had never seen happen to it before, and would spend the rest of her life being glad she had not missed. Every bit of careful management went simply and entirely went, and what was underneath it was so unguarded and so real that she felt it move through her like the first warm day after a very long winter. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps. He held her face in both hands. He looked at her. He said nothing, because there was nothing that language was adequate for in that moment, and he was a man who knew the difference between when words served and when they failed, and he let them fail completely. She put her hands over his. "All right," she said. "All right," he said, which in his vocabulary meant extraordinary, and more than I knew how to want, and yes, completely, and without reservation, yes. Said. She found out later from Clara Ambrose, who found out from the Reverend's wife, that Croft had quietly begun liquidating his Copper Creek holdings before the year was out. The land company retreated to its Tucson offices. Delicott left the territory entirely. The 2 sets of books were never examined publicly because the settlement made a hearing unnecessary, but Greer told Lucas privately that Judge Harmon had made it known in certain circles that he was aware of their existence, which amounted to the same thing. The south field got fenced in October as promised. She ordered the lavender seeds from a catalog in November, and they arrived in February, and she and Carson planted them on a cold morning with their breath visible in the air, and Carson complaining cheerfully about the temperature, and Eli standing at the fence telling them they were doing it wrong. She was large with the baby by then. She planted on her knees and got up slowly and brushed the dirt from her hands, and Lucas was there. He was always there now. Not hovering, not managing just near in the way that had become so habitual. She had stopped noticing it, except in the moments when she deliberately chose to notice it, which she did regularly because she had learned that the things you stop paying attention to have a way of becoming invisible, and she refused to let this become invisible. "You're going to be a terrible gardener," Eli told Lucas, watching him stake a lavender row. "I'm learning," Lucas said. "From the wrong teacher," Eli said. "She stakes too far apart." "I stake based on expected mature spread," Willa said without looking up. "This is Arizona, not England. They won't get that big." "These ones will," she said. Eli muttered something. Carson bit his lip. Lucas caught her eye over the row, and the line at the corner of his mouth was all the way out, and she looked back at her planting with the specific contentment of a woman who knows exactly where she is and means to stay. Sarah Elizabeth Reed was born in late spring. She arrived in the early morning before the heat with Dr. Ambrose present and Clara holding Willa's hand, and Lucas in the next room, in the particular agony of a man who cannot fix what is happening and therefore has no idea what to do with himself. Eli sat on the porch. Carson paced the yard. The whole ranch waited. When it was over, Clara opened the door to the main room and said, "Come meet your daughter." Lucas came in. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at Willa first, just her, just making sure the specific relief of a man confirming the thing that mattered most before anything else. She nodded. She was tired in a way she had no previous reference for, but she was whole, and she was here, and she was holding a small, furious, red-faced person who had arrived with strong opinions and no patience, which Willa suspected was going to be a consistent characteristic. She handed the baby to Lucas. He held her with the careful, slightly terrified competence of a man who had handled newborn calves and understood the principle, but was aware this was different. Sarah looked up at him with the unfocused intensity of the newborn, and Lucas looked back, and something moved across his face that was quieter and deeper than anything Willa had seen before. "Sarah Elizabeth," he said, quietly, like he was introducing himself. "She has your jaw," Willa said. "She has your expression," he said. "She looks like she's already deciding something." "She probably is," Willa said. He looked up from the baby to Willa. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the garden when she'd said she loved him, the unmanaged full-face version. "You know," he said, "I almost sent Carson for that feed delivery." "I know," she said. "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too," he said. Every day. Outside, the Arizona morning was moving into the business of being warm, and Eli had apparently relented enough to tell Carson the news, because she could hear Carson celebrating with the uninhibited enthusiasm of a young man who had decided he was family. Which he was. They all were this strange and functional and wholly unplanned collection of people who had found their way to each other through practical necessity and stayed for everything else. Willa closed her eyes for a moment. She let herself feel all of it, the weight of the morning. the sound of her daughter's small breathing, the presence of her husband beside her, the knowledge that this room and this ranch and this life were hers as fully and completely as anything she had ever owned. She had come to Arizona with $12 and a stranger's address and the desperate pragmatism of a woman who had run out of other options. She had found in the least likely of circumstances the truest version of herself. Not the careful version, not the managed version, but the one who planted lavender in a climate that wasn't quite right for it and kept records with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the details were where truth lived and who could say "I love you" plainly on a Tuesday evening in a kitchen garden without any preparation at all. James Walton had looked at her for 4 seconds and handed her back. The life she got instead was worth every one of those 4 seconds and every hard mile that came after. Wilhelmina Reed set her hand over her daughter's small back and felt the breathing steady and new and entirely convinced of its own continuation. And she understood fully and without qualification that rejection had not been the end of her story. It had simply been the door she'd had to go through to find the one that was always meant to open.